Hi everyone, this is Danelli. I am going to talk a little bit about Roe v. Wade and what it actually really means for a lot of Latinas and honestly just any BIPOC woman, to be honest. Because and I was thinking about this not too long ago, and it kind of just popped into my mind, and I thought, oh, this is a perfect topic to make a video on. Especially because I'm a huge fan of like Shira7 on TikTok, and she's just so on point with so many of her comments on the state of modern masculinity. She has a book called How to Date a Provider and Avoid a Dusty, and she's otherwise known as the Sprinkle Sprinkle Lady. And, this idea of like how to avoid a dusty, I think, in my personal and professional opinion, does not just apply to like romantic and sexual relationships with men. I was remembering a situation a few years ago where I was being interviewed by an attorney for a legal assistant position. And I actually have my paralegal certificate from UCLA. So I was perfectly qualified for this job. And I always remember this, and I've been remembering this interview for a really long time because it struck me as a moment where I made so many decisions in less than like 30 seconds about the situation that I found myself in. This was like for a position that was like pretty basic, legal assistant position. And during the interview, the attorney essentially um introduced the topic of Roe v. Wade. And, almost as soon as the topic was brought up, I number one knew that this was not a job that I wanted. This was not an attorney I wanted to work with. And I had to sit there and decide, is this staying for this interview worth it for me in any way, shape, or form, aside from potentially getting a job and being able to pay my bills sooner because I could probably get a different job that pays me more or better later on. So I had to sit there and decide, do some quick like thinking and obviously take into consideration that like as so many independent women that have to pay their bills, I had to decide whether maybe like compromising my unemployment would be worth it for, to leave this interview and move on to the next job interview. And I remember thinking, oh my God, this is the kind of man that I absolutely detest because they like, it felt like I was being held hostage in this conversation. But at the same time, I knew as an educated woman who has done a lot of like emotional and like psychological work that I had the option to leave. You always have the option to just excuse yourself and move on and just say this is not a position for me. Or I could also have the emotional intelligence to say I'm going to be a professional in this, be neutral, do the interview. If I get hired, this would be a position that I would completely detach from and just cash my paycheck. So, and both of those options are, for me, I had to sit down and say to myself, those two options are completely valid and okay, right? I could have completely left that interview and gone along with the rest of my day, not caring if I got hired or not. Or I could have just, decided if I get this job, this is a position that I'm detaching from and I'm just cashing a paycheck. So I sat there as soon as the, topic was brought up, I was like, oh my God, what am I gonna do? What am I doing? And it reminded me of something that one of my professors told me a long time ago. If you're ever put in a position in an interview and you don't 100% know the answer to something, it's number one, that's completely okay. Number two, there's a way of responding that should be professional enough. If you're ever put in a position where you're being asked something that you didn't prepare for, or you're not 100% sure, you are entitled to say, I was not prepared for this to answer this question at this interview. I would require more time to be able to research an appropriate answer that to be able to come to a conclusion. And you're also able to say, excuse yourself, or ask, how is this relevant to this position? Because the position that I'm interviewing for generally wouldn't require me or other kind of, people in my position to answer that type of question. So those are ways of answering or dealing with those situations. And I sat there and I thought to myself, I can just leave. I can stay and be professional and try to like get through this interview, go through the professional motions. And um, so I sat there in this at this moment with this attorney doing this interview, and I was thinking, well, what the heck, I canceled my entire day to have this interview. I kind of cleared my day. I could have gone and done other errands. I could have gone out. I could have gone hiking. I could have done a million other things, applied to other jobs, done other interviews, networked my way into other positions. And I thought, well, this sucks, being put in this position because not only do I have to deal with the emotional situation I've been put in where um, Roe v. Wade is a very touchy subject. The subject of abortion is uh, it's really controversial, and to bring something up like that in an interview, especially the way that this particular attorney was doing it in a way that uh, in which he seemed intent to either humiliate me or put my ego in check or make me look stupid or feel stupid as if my education hadn't been worth my investment. A number of different, like feelings and emotions and like thoughts were going through my mind in that situation. And I was forced to decide whether I wanted to sit through this interview or whether I wanted to have patience and just get through it and be professional. Um, and so I was remembering this interview because of the subject of like Roe v. Wade. And I specifically highlight how this is important for Latinas and why it's important for Latinas in particular. This isn't a situation that is unique to myself. I've actually had so many other friends be put in these positions by other males in position to hire women. And, you know, I've heard of so many women placed in this position and so many women who have supported these types of men, especially when it comes to the topic of abortions. And it reminded me of like something I had come across a while back regarding Roe v. Wade. And it had been something along the lines of like similar to this article that I'm highlighting right now by the ACLU, in which essentially Justice Ginsburg had said like something along the lines of fight for the things that you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you. And the emotional intelligence behind this exact quote was something that like in the moment of that interview I had to really tap into because I thought to myself, I can really engage this individual and uh, argue with him and waste my breath because I might not actually even get through this to this person, or I could save my energy and engage in this battle in some other way, in which I think would be a much more effective way. Hence why I'm making this video now, because I was thinking about this and I thought, oh, never mess with a woman that's a writer, because she will either humiliate you to death, embarrass you to death, or write you to death in a novel. And now with YouTube, we can also just make a YouTube video and, achieve the same end. Which was something I was thinking about as I was like watching Shiro 7 um on TikTok, and you know, uh she was talking about how like like I'm not gonna even text the guy back. I wouldn't care if he even woke up this morning. And I thought, oh, that's perfect. Um and I bring up what like Ginsburg was saying about this, right? Because like you need to choose your battles, and choose your battles how you're going to fight them as well. Um but she also said something else that I, had delved into years before, when it came to the subject of abortion, and when it came to the subject of Roe v. Wade. And again, this is a subject that is particularly important to Latinas, because so many Latinas are dealing with Latino men who are anti-abortion, and so many Latinas out there are either anti-abortion or are dealing with other women in their culture, in our culture, that are also anti-abortion. And generally, the culture does so, and takes this position from a religious point of view, because we're either really Christian or really Catholic or whatnot. And a lot of Latinas and Latinos were never really, um, didn't, they never really went into what Justice Ginsburg was actually trying to say about Roe v. Wade, and its importance for women. I delved into this years ago while I was doing my master's degree at Cal State Dominguez Hills. And I, sat down with a lot of my female colleagues, and we used to chat about this all the time, and similar other topics. And they really, when I talk about what we mean in education, or when we mean in English about like code switching, and how Latinas have the double burden of code switching quite a lot within our own cultures, and but also within the institutions that we're being educated in, and the workplace that we're working in. This idea of like being able to access the way that something is said and phrased, what it actually means, and what it actually represents. Essentially, you need to be able to translate the legalese, right, in the situation. And just in like other situations, you can say something professional, or you can say it, hella hood and hella ghetto, and, use street words. Um, that's the same idea. And what Ginsburg was saying, and I want to highlight this, that this article does so really well. She says the decision whether or not to bear a child is central to a woman's life, to her well-being and dignity. When government controls that decision for her, she is being treated as less than a fully adult human responsible for her own choices. I want to emphasize that what she's really saying here is that as a society, a patriarchy that is okay with restricting a woman's full autonomy, is a patriarchy or a society that is okay with having men have sex and control women through pregnancy, children, abortions, and motherhood. And the only kinds of women that do not have this full autonomy are very limited in society, and an evolved society with an evolved, fully like sexually evolved male. Those kinds of women that do not have full autonomy are women with retardation or severe disability issues, women that are under the legal age or are still little girls or children, women that are being lined up to be abused. So when Ginsburg says this, she's essentially saying If you are part of a society in which it is okay and you consider, curbing a woman's right to controlling her body and exercising her full autonomy in any and every way possible, including her health, physical and mental health, then what you are saying is that this is a society that is okay with giving more power to men with a lower IQ, giving more power to pedophiles, and giving more power to abusers over a fully autonomous woman or any woman for that matter. And when you actually translate what she's trying to say into basically, you know, like for lack of a better word, just ghetto talk or straight talk or whatever, however you want to say it. She's basically saying, like, if you're okay with this, um, whether you're a man or a woman, there's nothing else to say here about it. And so I sat down in this interview and I listened to this attorney and I like literally thought to myself, well, it really doesn't matter what kind of man, you know, we're talking about. It doesn't matter if this man is changing their mind because they're suddenly going to become a father. What they're really telling you is that this man doesn't care about the child. They care about, uh, saving face through controlling the woman instead of actually doing and being the kind of man that would never give a woman reason to doubt that she would bear his child. Um, and I sat down through this like interview and tried to be as professional as possible on it or about it. And I thought to myself, this is going to be a very interesting future story to tell. Um, and this is going to be a very interesting example for me to tell because as an intelligent woman, I always see even extremely, you know, um, extremely uncomfortable positions or stories as opportunities. And we have like, I have finally, I think, brought to culmination kind of like that moment in that interview. Um, and something I want to also bring up, right, was because the idea that, oh, Ginsburg later on went to say that Roe v. Wade wasn't the best way to guarantee women the right to choose or to decide whether they were going to have an abortion or not, because you can't see it as a civil issue. It's more so a human rights issue. I actually disagree on that. I think that any kind of law or situation which positions women which puts women in a position in which her gender or sex and the qualities of her gender and sex or that are come attached to her gender and sex, in other words, motherhood, pregnancy, childbearing, is weaponized against her by males or masculinity or patriarchy, is inherently an abusive situation. And having come from a family history of domestic violence, I know that for the most part, most of domestic violence situations are considered civil issues or domestic or criminal issues, essentially. So, I sat down in this interview and I thought to myself, um, once again, I have to really think about how I'm going to fight this battle, because it was an extension of something that I had already lived through so many other times. It was just another phase. But unfortunately, and I highlight again why this is so important in the Latino community, that a lot of this type of coercion and domestic violence, gender and sexual based violence, is often incredibly obscure and veiled through cultural practices, including religion. And unfortunately for Black and Latina women, domestic violence and domestic abuse and gender and sexual based abuse is systemic and structural, which means that a lot of different moving parts are actually put in place to manipulate or control or coerce women for the express purpose of controlling women, because there's nothing more dangerous to men than a woman that has full autonomy, physical, mental, and financial. And so you already know this is a civil issue when it's an abuse issue. And I love this ACLU article because that is essentially what they also end up highlighting towards the end here, um, the other justices surely understood the reference. The majority opinion treated women as lesser as children. If you don't have a problem with that, uh, there's something wrong, right? So we're essentially condoning a type of abuse and pedophilia, and uh, you know, that is just not okay. I wanted to make this nice and short and sweet because I think there's just like a spur of the moment decision to make this video. But if you have any other questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to like post them on this video. Also, feel free to like, share, comment, whatnot, all that good stuff. Thank you so much. This was Danelli, covering Latinas. What this is what you should know about Roe v. Wade. Bye.